Let's just
Should work
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to rainy Birmingham. Thank you for those of you who made it in person, and obviously for those of you online. I hope everybody can see me. Am I looking in the right direction? What I'd like to do for the next 10 minutes or so is to set the scene a bit about the EYSEND partnership, our aims. I'm going to make a short attempt to also put it in context of what's going on at the moment in the early years and SEND sectors, and then we'll move on to the presentations from our partners. The EYSEND partners who are in the room now, you have permission to nod off because you have heard this already. Or even better, if you do want to come in and add anything from your own point of view, that would also be fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the overall aims of the partnership, and I should say the EYSEND work is funded by DFE, part of the this year's grants. And this year, this iteration of funding is a bit different from the latest one, in the sense that we are focusing on the 75 family hub areas, and we aim to help support parents and carers with children with SEND and integrate local services. Can we move it? Is that possible? One of these plans of work in particular, but this is also something that runs through all our pieces of work. It's around helping the partnerships to develop and implement effective speech language and communication pathways in the early years, and finally to improve the quality and take-up of speech and language pathways. We're going to do this by improving the confidence and knowledge of the family hub workforce to identify and support children from 0 to 5 with issues around SEND. And obviously, the point about re-empowering and giving agency to the workforce is really important. We also know, and I think this will come up throughout the day, that the picture with the workforce and family hubs is quite patchy. So obviously, there's a lot of available practice going on, but we don't have a standardized set of qualifications and know-how. And certainly, when we speak to people locally, we find this is a big area of need. And not least important, increasing parental competence and knowledge to help parents support the child, identify what support is on offer, and how to access it to be empowered. The DFE wording actually talks about accessing this as a consumer and trying to soften the language a bit, and we see this more as in the realm of civic duty, I suppose. So I'd like to try and set this in the context of what we like to think of and talk about as a social mission. This is really about addressing inequality. There's a lot of data out there, and I'm really just going to pick 2 or 3 points. And again, my invitation to all of you in the room and our partners in particular, if you want to add anything, please feel free to. We know that children with additional needs at age 5 are already almost 5 months behind their peers. We know that by the age of 3, cognitive skills are affected by socio-economic differences. On this point, I need to point out this is not a SEND issue in itself per se, but we are working, a lot of our work and the focus is around the universal offer, and we do believe the good practice, high-level quality practice for those who SEND will have that wider ripple effect. And certainly, we also know that there's a disproportionate representation of children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in the SEND data. So I think it's artificial to try and separate the two. And this is, again, pretty alarming. Around 23% of children who SEND are achieving good level of development in the EYSEND profile results. This is compared to over 65% of all children. And again, I probably need to caveat this and say, state the obvious. Some of this will be down to genuine organic impairment, but we believe that not all of this. And we certainly believe that we can eat into these figures. By the way, those of you who are scribbling furiously, we are showing this afterwards. You're welcome to write down, but if you don't have to, because this will be shared.
So a reminder it's being recorded.
And it's been recorded. But it's great. If you want to take notes, of course, I'm all for it. Another place where we are identifying issues around inequality is the take-up of early education childcare entitlement. The take-up of this entitlement amongst children with SEND is around 37%. Those without is 45. This is quite a significant difference. And a few points to make about this. Or I would say what is driving possibly these differences. One is around what we call continuity of settlement peers. If you think about continuity of peers in particular, because we do believe this is very important, what this means is when a child moves from the earlier setting to reception class, how many children do they know from the previous setting? And there's quite an alarming data. It's not very up to date. I think it's 3 years ago, but I don't think this has drastically changed at all in the intervening time. That almost half of children we send do not know anyone when they start reception class, to know anyone from the previous setting, that is. And that is obviously a concern, especially for children who, as it is, quite often struggle with the social skills, etc. Okay, so lack of appropriate provision, and I put in brackets perceived. This, of course, will vary according to locality. But even if we're only to talk about this perception, it is a problem in itself. And I spoke earlier about the fact that we are trying to empower parents to understand what the children should be entitled to, what they can access, etc. This goes also to actual settings. Unfortunately, we know as a fact that there are a good number of settings who are not actually delivering the high quality provision which children require. But there's also the question of perception, and I think we need to work on these two things in tandem. And this is a phrase I heard not long ago, childcare deserts, basically saying that there are areas where there either aren't any childcare facilities at all, or if they are not suitable or not perceived to be suitable for those with additional needs. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a moment, but I'm sure that all of you are also aware that there's increasing numbers of settings actually closing. It's very difficult to catch up and remedy that as we move along, and actually the needs are increasing. And I can see some nods in the room, and I know you identify this from your daily work. Right, health warning, I'm moving into the depressing part of the morning. I'll try and keep it short if possible. So the sector is under pressure. I mean, I would say that there's two sectors over here in a way. There's the earlier sector and the SEND sector, and both of them are really recognized and being pretty much at the point of crisis. One thing we are hearing constantly, and some of the partners I'm looking here, Catherine in particular, I think speak about this quite a lot, around the recruitment and retention crisis. There are simply not enough people in the job. There was a huge exodus over the period of COVID, and we know this now. That hasn't been recovered at all. There's still a lot of issues around pay, recognition, etc. And I know that policymakers are thinking about it at the moment, but certainly we don't really have any substantial responses or remedy for this at the moment. Funding, I can probably make do by simply saying the word funding because you understand what I mean, but just to try and flesh out a bit. So a relatively recent report demonstrated that actually earlier settings are suffering more from the cost of living than your average household. So that says something in itself. A huge proportion of settings are saying about themselves that they're not receiving sufficient levels of funding. Then we have the increase in the number of children who send. This sentence alone could justify a whole day seminar, and actually I think it's quite important to talk about it a bit. There's been about a 16% increase in a year on ECP applications of under fives. In the latest year of data, new ECP applications of under fives are nearly a quarter of all new ECP applications. So that's again quite a telling piece of data. You have a bit of data over here about the self-perception in the sector. And I'll add to all of this also the fact that if you look at more discrete areas of diagnosis, if, for instance, around autism, we know that not only across the nation, but actually internationally, there's a I don't know if I can call it an explosion, but certainly a very, very significant rise in these numbers. There's quite a lot of thinking going on about why this is happening, but what we're seeing on the floor shop, as it were, is simply more children with additional needs coming in, and more of them with greater acuity of needs. And again, I'm going to expand on this, I think, in the next slide. Because one of the main factors being considered, and I'm going to sit on the fence in respect of trying to ascertain to what degree this is a main factor or not, is the legacy of COVID. I've chosen to give you some quotes from a piece from the media recently from David Bell, who you might know or heard of. I need to make a point that this is not a party political point I'm trying to make. He is associated at the moment with one particular political party, but I think more importantly, he has enough gravitas behind him in the sector to listen carefully to what he's Again, this is not an exhaustive list. Just a couple of things or 3 things I thought worth bringing to your attention today. So, head teachers are speaking of children arriving at schools. I'm going to say cautiously unprepared. The reason I'm saying it's cautiously because we quite often try to turn this over and say that schools are not prepared for the children. But what we're seeing is basically head teachers talk about very limited language communication and social skills, children still wearing nappies when they come, and general self-care skills really not where they're supposed to be. Fewer 2-year-olds are reaching expected standards of development this year, and again, we're expecting this to be the trend over the next couple of years at least. And children with SEND in particular are arriving significantly behind their peers. Again, this is particularly pertinent to reception class, where actually the kinds of demands and expectations placed on children really change quite drastically and at times at once. And the side comment I say this is something else we're trying to work on a partnership. We keep both on the school side and on the earlier setting side to make sure that these transitions are working more effectively and supporting in particular those additional needs. So I'm sure that all of you are aware that the childcare support is expanding. I'm using DFE's language over here, so the entitlements are expanding, and ostensibly this is supposed to be a very good thing, but there's a great concern in the sector, both generally in the sense of how they're going to manage to accommodate these increasing numbers, and more specifically, what does this mean for the cohort of children we have a particular interest in, namely those with same additional needs, because unfortunately we know from past experience, somewhat ironically, that when entitlement expands, it appears to be harder for children with additional needs to actually secure these placements. Again, this is something we are paying a lot of attention to and putting great efforts to try and mitigate. In fact, in CDC, we're working with one particular area now precisely on this point to try and find solutions at system level, because obviously the previous challenges I mentioned, like staffing, funding, etc., we can't really have a huge impact on, so we need to try and see what we can do in the system as it is. These are the parameters of the expansion. I'm sure you're familiar with them, so I won't waste too much time going over them. So what is going on and why do we think this is a bit of a concern? So the first thing to say is there's simply a reduction in settings and childcare places amongst them. Again, I would say there's a bit of a contention around different interpretations of the data. I think the FE maybe are looking at different kind of numbers of number of placements as opposed to settings, etc. I think it's not controversial to say that the bottom line, however you look at it, is there's less placements for children with special needs. There are significant losses and closes in deprived areas, which obviously adds to the other pressures we find anywhere. The reasons, again, are basically what we spoke about before: insufficient income to meet rising costs, workforce-related issues, etc. And if you look at these 2 pieces of data over here from Coram, and we're going to have a speaker from there later this morning, I think they sort of speak for themselves. And over here, I'm going to put my head above the parapet, and I say perhaps not everybody will agree with this, and so I'm going to phrase myself as facing questions as opposed to making very forceful statements. The drive to look at the situation at the moment in the EYSEND sector and the response being to expand universal entitlements does bring into question what is the main driver, and there's a question about is this simply being used as a leverage to expand the workforce, mainly mothers. That might be seen as a good thing in itself, but it does raise a question about where the focus is, and is it the focus placed in the right place? What does that mean about the way we're looking at professionals in the areas sector? Most importantly for us, what does this mean for children with SEND? Are enough safeguards being put in place so all area settings, for instance, can comply with the Equality Act and make sure that, for instance, attendance and placements are secured for those with greater needs? Finally, and this is again not really a SEND issue, but more about finances and socioeconomic factors, are those who need the help most getting most of the help? And I don't mind saying that personally, I don't think that's the situation at the moment, according to the plans. And again, that's something that we are working, the opposite policy makers, to try and put that point of view forward. Okay, so how can we help? In short, I'm not going to go over all of this. These are some kind of main points. I mean, I think the things I would like to highlight are, firstly, we believe in early intervention, as I'm sure all of you do, as part of you being here in the earlier sector. We do a lot of work to promote voice of parent carers and children actually as well. And as I said, we put a lot of emphasis on increasing the confidence and the agency of the workforce. We do strongly believe the workforce, as things stand at the moment, are generally underpaid, oftentimes undertrained, and very often overlooked in respect of kind of consideration of the general conditions, etc. And these are the kind of things we want to raise the profile of, and also try and address in our work. The longer answer to how can we help, hopefully you'll find throughout the day, both for the talks of the partners and also for the workshops. I think another reminder to make sure that when you go on break, if you haven't done so far, please make sure that you register for the workshop which you find interesting.